All right, so today we're going to be talking about powers of 10 and exponents. Now, yesterday we kind of reviewed place value and we talked a little bit about decimals and how we can write our numbers, including numbers that have decimals. And today we're going to be talking about powers of 10 and what in the world an exponent is. Well, if you see here, I have some examples of the powers of 10. And all of these numbers have a smaller number right beside it. And see how it's a little bit above? So this right here, the smaller number is called an exponent. And really, an exponent just means that you're actually going to be multiplying. Okay? Now, in this case, we're going to be multiplying by tens because 10, those are all of our whole numbers. Now, you might later on see some examples that might have a 5 with an exponent. Or maybe you'll see some examples that have a 12 with an exponent. So that's the same thing as saying I have 5 to the first power or I have 12 to the third power. In this case, we have 10 to the first power. Well, 10 to the first power is actually just 10 because it's saying I have 110, okay? Now, if we look at the second example, it's 10 to the second power. So our exponent here is 2. That's saying that I have 10, but I have 10 2 times. It's not the same thing as saying 10 times 2 because what is 10 times 2? 10 times 2 is 20. It's not saying that. It's saying I have 10, but I have it 2 times. So I have 10 times 10. That is equal to 100. So 10 to the second power is just saying I have 100. Those are the same thing. 10 to the second power, I can say it's 10 times 10, or I can say it's 100. Let's look at the next example. I have 10 to the third power. That just means that I have the number 10, but I have it 3 times. So I have 10 times 10 times 10. Well, I could come over here and do 10 times 10 times 10, or so far we can kind of see a pattern. 10 to the first power is 10. I have 1 0. My exponent is 1. Okay? 10 to the second power. I have 2 zeros, and then my answer has 2 zeros. So 10 times 10 times 10, okay, I just have 3 zeros, so it's 1,000. So if you notice a little pattern here, you're actually adding a 0 each time. Now, let's look at 10 to the fourth power. 10 to the fourth power is saying I have 10, but I have 10 4 times. So 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Well, okay, I have my 1 and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So I need 4 zeros. But let's make sure we always put our comma in. So 1, 2, 3, comma. So guess what? That's 10,000. So 10 to the fourth power is the same thing as 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 10,000. And remember, at the end of all of our whole numbers, there's always a decimal. So I could even put a decimal here. It's still 10,000. Even if I put a 0 here, it's still 10,000 because I have a decimal there. Now, 10 to the fifth power. Here's my exponent. That's the same thing as saying I have 10, but I have 10 5 times. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Wow, that is a lot of zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I got to put my comma in. That's 1,000, or sorry, that's 100,000. So 10 to the fifth power is the same thing as 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 100,000. And then our last example is 10 to the 6th power. Well, I bet you guessed it, it's going to be 10, but 6 times. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, as you can see, as our exponents get larger, we have to write all this out. So that's why it's kind of easier just to say 10 to the 6th. So I know that I have 1 and I have 6 zeros. And then I need to put my commas in between. So that's 1 million. So that is how the powers of 10 kind of work. Now, we're going to move on to how we multiply by the powers of 10. Now, if you're multiplying by a power of 10, we already know that powers of 10 could be 10 to the 1st, it could be 10 to the 2nd, it could be 10 to the 5th, and we just talked about 10 to the 5th is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, okay? So let's do a couple examples. Let's say that I have 54 times 10 to the 1st power. Well, this is a whole number, but remember, all of our whole numbers have decimals at the end of them. 10 to the 1st power. That means I only have 10 one time. So that's the same thing as saying I have 10. Now, there is a little trick that you can do when you're multiplying by a power of 10. You could just say I have 54 times, we said that was 10. You come over here, I know 0 times 4 is 0, 0 times 5 is 0. I got to bring down my 0, zip, zap, 0. 1 times 4, 1 times 5, 540. Well, we know that's our answer, but there's actually an easier way. If you're multiplying by a power of 10, your number is getting bigger, isn't it? When you multiply anything, your number gets bigger. Number gets bigger. Okay, when you divide, you know your number gets smaller because you're dividing that number up. We went from 54 to 540. Well, guess what? There's an even easier way that you can do this. Let's say you have 54, just like we said. Our decimal's always at the end of our number. If I want to make this number bigger, because I'm multiplying by 10 to the 1st, this exponent tells me how many times I have to move to the right. So yes, last year in my class, we had a lot of mooing. We were cows a lot of the year because we were moving to the right, however many times that exponent told us to move. It told us to move one time, so we moved one time. Well, we have to put a 0 here because our decimal is no longer here anymore. We moved it to the right one place value. So now our decimal is here. So that's how we have 540. So let's do another example together. We have 23 and 4/10. Now, we're going to multiply that by 10 to the 2nd power. 10 to the 2nd power. Well, that's 10 times 10. And I know that Miss Dowdy said that would be, count your zeros, 2. So that's 100. Now, you could multiply 23 and 4/10 times 100, but that would take you forever, wouldn't it? So we know that this exponent tells us how many times to move to the right if we're multiplying. So here's my number. 23 and 4/10. I move the decimal one time, then it's at the end of the 4, but I have to move it 2 times. So I'm going to move it to the right again. Now my decimal is here. My decimal is not here anymore. But guess what? I have to fill this in with a 0. So now my number is this. And you can keep the decimal at the end if you want. 2,340. So I went from 23 and 4/10 to 2,340. As you can see, that made it a lot bigger. So today we are going to be practicing together as a class with a few more examples.